This week, I'm diving into the Epiphany, when the wise men from the East came to see Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. I know it's probably a story we've heard tons of times, but I encourage you today to engage your imagination, to imagine you were there. What would it be like? What did it really mean for them? For Mary and Joseph, for the wise men, for the shepherds, for even King Herod. And it even says in Scripture today that the people of Jerusalem were worried about this message. What does it feel like today to be there? And how can you relate that to Christ? Welcome back to Lift Up Your Hearts podcast. This is a podcast where I help people use the Ignatian style of prayer to dive into Scripture. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a biblical scholar or a linguist. You can dive in simply with your imagination, maybe some muscle you haven't flexed since you were a kid. I encourage you to prayerfully enter in. St. Ignatius says the first thing we do when we enter into any type of prayer, and I would argue the first thing we should do when we wake up in the morning even, is to imagine God the Father, to contemplate God the Father gazing upon us with a gaze of love. How does he look at you today? Not how you look at yourself, but how the loving Father gazes upon his beloved Son and daughter, whom he calls by name, whom he delights in. There are times where he gazes upon you. I encourage you to contemplate that today for about the moment of an Our Father. Enter into this prayer so that we can commune with him through the Scripture. It's helpful for us to imagine the reality, even if it feels far off. It is a reality that the Father gazes upon you with love. He looks at you and with joy and delight. He looks at you with joy and delight right now. Today the passage, like I said, is the Epiphany. We're reading it from the Gospel of Matthew. You can find it in chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. This is obviously the infancy narrative. We don't really know how long of a time period this would have been. If it was a week, a month, 6 months, we're not really sure. Maybe that's part of what you imagine. Maybe that's some part of what you contemplate. Maybe there's some time for Mary and Joseph to have baby Jesus there for a little while. And he's not just like I think oftentimes it's easy to, because we read these so close to Scripture, to think that baby Jesus is 2 weeks old. When indeed, that might not be the case. And that's okay. The nice thing about Ignatian prayer is there's really no right or wrong way to imagine it. You could imagine him being a month old, 6 months old, maybe a year old even. That they followed this star, and other people saw this star, and they came to this family. And these non-religious, non-Jewish people did something I think is quite extraordinary. It's one of the reasons I put it on our Christmas card every year, every other year, as much as possible, that they rejoiced exceedingly when they saw the star, when they saw the baby. That seems, I just love that passage. I just loved imagining that happen. And what might have been going through their head and their hearts at that moment. What's going through Mary and Joseph's heart at that moment? Let's read through it here. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 1 through 12. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, Behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it had been written through the prophet, And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler, who is to shepherd my people Israel. When Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word that I too may go and do him homage. After their audience with the king, they set out, and behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house they saw the child with Mary his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their country by another way. So Ignatius says, when we read through it the first time, kind of orient ourselves, get the setting, what's happening, what's going on. It helps us to understand the passage. It helps us to enter in fully, to imagine being one of the people there. That's the difference that Ignatius says between contemplation and meditation. Meditation is meditating on the truths and things that stick out to us. This is what you might hear typically from a Lectio Divina. I'm reading divine scripture. I'm meditating on it. I'm thinking about it. St. Ignatius says contemplation is entering into the passage as one of the people and really fully taking on their character. If I'm one of those wise men from the East, I'm not a religious Jew. But I hear there's something in me that I'm intrigued by this star. Some have kind of painted them as astronomers. There's also the song, of course, kings, magi, wise men. I don't know if we're really sure. I don't know if we'll know until we get to heaven exactly their job or their title. But there's certainly something that intrigued them. And there's certainly something, like they traveled a long ways. They traveled quite a ways. There had to be something also that they couldn't quite follow the star exactly. But also there was another king that they were going to visit. There's another king. They entered into Jerusalem. They must have known they were kind of close. But they couldn't know exactly, because why would they have to ask King Herod? So there must have been some type of I don't know, maybe there's some proximity. Maybe the star is kind of, I don't know if it's moving, but there's certainly some understanding that when they get to the home, they know exactly where it is. But when they're far off, they know it's kind of proximal to here. But Jerusalem and Bethlehem are not 1 mile or something. They're a little distant, so there must have been some, I don't know, they couldn't quite see exactly where it was above. So they inquired with Herod, and they must have gotten the willies a little bit from him, that he was troubled and the people were troubled. Because also, where do we hear this from? I think it's kind of interesting to think about Scripture sometime as, where did we get this story from? Someone in that circle must have told someone else, or even the people of Jerusalem. It says the people of Jerusalem were even troubled with him, that there was some other king. Now, troubled could mean there was a lot of commotion and excitement or fear or whatever, turmoil. But it also kind of depends on who's telling the story. Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, so maybe this is pretty common knowledge to the people of Jerusalem that, yeah, they were troubled when they heard this news. Maybe there was a little bit of a decree or something went out, or I don't know. I just love that, thinking about these things, like what really happened? How do we get this story? Someone must have. These are a storytelling people. It's a storytelling time. There wasn't Twitter or any Instagram or any of those things to send messages readily and speedily, or to disseminate them widely or far even. So to disseminate any type of information is actually quite expensive. So there must have been quite a bit of knowledge of this, actually. And then the wise men, these non-religious, non-Jews, non-religious people, not following, and they didn't even live in this kingdom, but they knew there was a king, there was some importance, there was some intrigue about him. There was some intrigue. They didn't even know what they were looking for, I guess, I guess they're probably looking for a baby. There's a king to be born. I'm also guessing they're thinking of maybe they went to Jerusalem because they thought Herod had a baby, or his wife, you know what I mean? Like, there's a new king of the Jews or someone in Jerusalem. Yeah, maybe that's the story. Maybe they were looking because that's where the head of the kingdom is. And then they inquire further, but then they see this baby in an objectively poor situation. But it doesn't seem like they question it. They rejoice. In other translations, says they rejoiced exceedingly. Like, they rejoiced exceedingly. They saw the baby with Mother Mary, and they prostrated themselves. This isn't their king, but they saw something in Jesus. And they prostrated themselves, paid him homage, some type of bowing or showing reverence to this baby king. And then they gave him quite extraordinary gifts, not cheap, really expensive gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then they go home by another way, because they're told in a dream not to go back to Herod. I also wonder what that journey was like for them on the way home. St. Ignatius says to dive into all of these things, ask all of these questions, imagine all of these things happening. Some passage that you've read 1,000 times, or you've heard, or you read as a kid, can come alive, and you don't have to be. I'm not a scripture scholar. I don't have to be. I can read it and ask questions and be curious, and I can wonder. What would also then have been like from the side of Mary and Joseph? These men, you have no clue. For one, I would think it'd be a little scary, first of all. They come in, rejoice exceedingly, and then they pay him homage, give him reverence, and then they give extraordinary gifts. I was just thinking as Joseph, who's not really, but a little bit on the outside of this story. He's, of course, there and on the inside, but he's not the mother. He's not really the father either. He's his adopted dad, or he's there to. He's certainly Mary's husband, and I think he's wondering, like, is this? If I'm him, I'm thinking, is this going to happen a lot? Are we going to be able to live a normal life? That these men from a far, far away came and did this to him, and like, is the secret out? Is there a secret at all? How am I going to protect this child? I think there's also just some wonder and awe in the intrigue of a king that you give lordship to, especially for these wise men that give him homage and prostrate themselves before him. I understand that that's probably a regular thing in front of a king, but he's not their king. And I wonder how, to me, this kind of, my prayer this week with Jesus is, do I give the same reverence and homage, and do I rejoice exceedingly? Do I rejoice exceedingly at my King? Do I pay him even as much homage as these strangers? Do I offer as much as these gifts? Or is it a little too familiar for me? Is it a little too familiar being brought up in the faith outside of a kingdom as well? That's my prayer this week. That's what this style of prayer can lead to. The Bible and the Scripture opening up to you and seeing it from a different perspective, understanding what it might have been like for the people there, and then leading to a deeper encounter with Jesus, asking him these questions. Do I do this? How did this happen? Help me see this better. Help me be as reverent and pay homage to you like these foreign kings. Help me to offer myself, travel a great distance for you. Help me not to be so familiar with you. I am praying for you. Please pray for me. I will see you next week. God bless.